Good afternoon, and welcome to True Crime Mysteries. If you're new to the channel, hello and welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. Today we are continuing on our serial killer deep dive of Robert Durst. We're picking up where we left off with part 2. Let's get into it. After Kathy's disappearance, Robert Durst takes a big step back from the New York City social scene he once dominated. He only kept a close circle of friends, primarily just consisting of Susan Berman and a select few others. Between 1990 and 2000, Durst attempted to reinvent himself, starting with his marriage. In 1990, he sold the South Salem home that he and Kathleen shared, and unbeknownst to Kathleen's family, filed for divorce from his still missing wife, claiming spousal abandonment. Durst allegedly started behaving oddly at work, which included urinating in trash cans. While he was next in line to take over his family's company, his father Seymour appointed his younger brother Douglas to the position in 1994 instead. Durst accused his brother of stealing the company from him, causing a rift between Robert and the rest of the family. In 1999, the New York City Police reopened Kathleen's missing person case. They searched Durst's former South Salem home for the time, as well as the nearby Truesdale Lake. Then, in 2000, the investigation into Kathleen's disappearance became public. In November of 2000, Durst left New York after his sister Wendy told him that police were reopening Kathleen's case. He escaped the city to avoid police inquiries and started renting a $300 a month apartment in Galveston, Texas, where no one knew who he was. While living in Galveston, he pretended to be a mute woman named Dorothy Siner, a name he took from a high school friend. While in Galveston, he was spotted wearing women's wigs around town and visiting the library to look up articles about himself. Durst later said he posed as a mute woman because of his distinctive voice. He believed anyone would have been able to identify him if he spoke. The next month, Durst married Deborah Cheriton, a Manhattan real estate broker he had been dating off and on for the past decade. It was a hasty ceremony officiated by a single rabbi picked out of the phone book. They are still married to this day, though they've reportedly never lived together over the course of their marriage and have gone years without speaking. Little is known about his time in Texas. Little is known about why he married Deborah so hastily. Though in New York, spouses are legally exempt from testifying about their spouse, and are also exempt from disclosing confidential communication. Then, according to Durst, Susan Berman called him in December of 2000. The police wanted to interview her about Kathleen's disappearance. In December of 2000, Susan Berman was living alone at her home in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles, where she was working as a journalist and author. A so-called mafia princess, Susan wrote about her family ties to reported gangsters, more specifically her father, David "Davy" Berman, a Las Vegas mob boss. Susan and Durst became fast friends after meeting as students at UCLA. When she was 12, her father had died on the operating table, and her mother had died of a drug overdose a year later. These traumas bonded Susan to Durst, as he believed his mother had also committed suicide by jumping off the roof of their home as a child. Susan would call Durst the little brother she never had and was very protective of him. When Susan got married in 1984, it was Durst who walked her down the aisle. The two had been nearly inseparable for decades. When Kathleen had disappeared, Susan had been Durst's unofficial spokesperson. He would give her statements through Susan, and she had also been his alibi for the night Kathleen had gone missing. However, she and Durst drifted apart when he disappeared out of the blue for years. She eventually left New York, settling in California instead, where she wrote 2 books about her life as a mob boss's daughter. Though her life was actually quite sad, she spun it to sound like an incredibly glamorous life growing up as mob royalty. Susan was also an incredibly paranoid person. She always thought people were after her because of her work. Though many of the people she wrote about were long gone, and a lot of the old mafia days she had experienced as a child were long gone by the 2000s. No one else really gave credit to her paranoia. They always described her as being incredibly hyperbolic, dramatic, and over the top. Leading up to her death, Susan was short on money. She was facing eviction from her home and was absolutely flat broke, and in desperation, she reached out to Durst. Though she wasn't able to get a hold of him conventionally, she instead left a voicemail message on a phone number he maintained in New York. Without a word, he gifted her $50,000 that she used to pay her debts and get herself back on track. She had recently been hired to work on a couple new big projects. Things were starting to look up for Susan. She had been grateful to have the little brother she never had back in her life. However, she was contacted by the Westchester District Attorney Jeanine Pirro, who informed Susan she was reopening the Kathy Durst case 18 years later and wanted to interview her. Susan had never been interviewed in the initial investigation. The interview had been arranged to take place sometime early in the new year, and somehow the fact that the new DA wanted to interview Susan Berman had made front-page news in New York. On December 19th, Susan spoke with her friend actress Kim Langford, telling her that she had the story of a lifetime and had information that was going to blow the top off things. Kim assumed the information was related to a project she was working on about her life growing up around the mob in Vegas. She also told Kim she had recently spoken to a psychic, who had told her she'd die a violent death that involved a gun. On Christmas Eve in 2000, police were called to Susan's home after neighbors reported that her dogs were running loose on the street and barking wildly. Police arrived at Susan's home and found the back door ajar. In the doorway of one of the bedrooms, they found Susan Berman, 55 years old. She had been shot execution style, with one bullet to the back of the head. There were no signs of forced entry and nothing appeared to have been stolen. Police determined she'd been murdered a day or two before the discovery of the body. Some speculated that it was a mob hit, made in retaliation for the information she was about to reveal in this upcoming project. Others suspected her manager, Niall Brenner, who she reportedly had a very turbulent relationship. Friends said that because of Susan's career, she was extremely paranoid. They said she always had her home locked up tight and never opened the door to strangers, so they felt it was unlikely that she had been murdered by someone she didn't know. That left only a handful of people who Susan trusted implicitly. But when Westchester County District Attorney Jeanine Pirro revealed that Susan had been on the short list of witnesses she wanted to speak to about Kathleen's disappearance, many of Kathleen's friends speculated Durst had killed Susan to keep her quiet, though those from Susan's social circle said she wouldn't have testified against him due to her mob-like loyalty. Soon after Susan's body was discovered, Los Angeles police received an anonymous letter postmarked for December 23rd. The letter was addressed to the Beverly Hills Police, with Beverly misspelled. Inside the note had Susan's address with one word: cadaver. As it turns out, Susan did have key information to share. According to her friend Linda Obst, Susan told her that she was the one that called the New York Albert Einstein College of Medicine on February 1st when she had allegedly called in sick. According to the prosecuting attorney, Durst asked Susan to cover for him when Kathleen had first disappeared, by posing as Kathleen and calling in sick to school so people would believe she'd made it to Manhattan. They theorized that Durst had killed Susan after discovering her scheduled interview with the police, fearing she'd turn him in. Miriam Barnes, Susan's close friend, testified that Susan called her and told her that she'd done a favor for Durst, but was nervous telling her about it. She told Miriam, "If anything happens to me, Bobby did it." A closer look into Durst's activity revealed he'd been in California in late December and had left on a late-night flight from San Francisco to New York on the day she was murdered. At the time of the investigation, Durst was questioned about Susan's murder, but never charged. Robert Durst did not attend the funeral of his oldest and dearest friend, Susan Berman. On September 30th, 2001, a man fishing with his son in Galveston Bay discovered a human torso floating in the water. They called the police and searched the area and found several garbage bags, each bag containing dismembered body parts. A total of 12 bags were found. In the bags, they also found an outer packaging for a bow saw, a receipt for garbage bags and drop cloths, and a newspaper that contained a handwritten note, an address, 2213 Avenue K. At the address, officers searched the garbage cans nearby, where they found more black garbage bags similar to the ones they had already recovered. Inside the dumpsters, they found an empty trash bag box, packaging for a drop cloth, packaging for a 4-inch paring knife, a .22 caliber shell casing, and an eviction notice addressed to Morris Black. Morris Black was one of the tenants in the shared home on Avenue K. He had been a veteran with a murky past. He was estranged from his family and his ex-wife. He lived a nomadic life, and if he occasionally reached out to someone, he never disclosed where he was. He had landed in Texas sometime in the mid-90s, and he'd been arrested in '98 for threatening to blow up a utility company over an issue with his bill. His lifestyle made it hard for a timeline of his life to be tracked down. There were decades of time without any documentation tying him to any particular place. Those in Galveston who had met Morris described him as a grumpy old man who was suspicious of everyone and prone to screaming outbursts. He used to live in New York, but seemed to have gone off the grid in 1982. It was also discovered that Black had $130,000 in an out-of-state bank account. Despite not having worked for decades, he had been living off of the money for many years. Friends and family of Black had no idea he had that kind of money, and he was now missing. They were able to execute a search warrant for Morris's home. Once inside, they discovered blood evidence everywhere, in the bathroom sink, the kitchen, in all of the drains. They sprayed luminol throughout the apartment and it lit up like Christmas. Walls, floors, and drag marks that led from Morris's apartment to the apartment across the hall. The apartment across the hall belonged to Dorothy Siner, a mute old woman whose neighbors had little to offer about who this woman was. She was rarely seen, had been known to travel frequently, kept her shades drawn, and kept to herself. Investigators got a court order to enter, and again found blood everywhere. In Dorothy's kitchen, there had been several cuts in the linoleum, and when officers pulled it back, they had discovered pools of dried blood underneath. Unlike in Morris's apartment, this apartment hadn't been cleaned as thoroughly. There was dry blood splatter all over the place, along with a paring knife, a cleaver, a handsaw, and a pistol, which was suspected to be the murder weapon. One of the bags recovered from the bay was empty. It had a large rip in it, and officers concluded that it was the one that contained Morris's head, which was the only body part not recovered. It also likely contained key evidence that would answer the question that still remained: cause of death. They had been able to compare fingerprints from Morris's time in the military to those on the body to identify him. A medical examiner determined that the body parts recovered from the bay were that of 71-year-old Morris Black.
Did it look like somebody who was doing this in a panic?
This looked like someone had done this before. And the medical examiner testified that the person who cut this body up knew what kind of instrument to use on what bone and what muscle and what part of the body.
Do you think it's possible that Robert Durst is guilty of more than 3 murders?
Well, I do believe that he's guilty of more than 3 murders, just because I saw what he did to the body of Morris Black.
Dorothy Siner was also missing, and police turned their attention to finding her. They had been able to determine that Morris had likely been murdered in his apartment, but had been dismembered in her apartment. Why had a man been dismembered in an old mute lady's apartment? It didn't make sense. They were able to unravel Dorothy's true identity when they found a receipt in the building's trash. It was from a local optometrist, and it had Durst's name on it. With that information, they concluded that perhaps there wasn't a Miss Siner. Perhaps Robert Durst had been masquerading as an old mute woman. Neighbors couldn't recall seeing Dorothy around the time that Morris disappeared, though they did recall seeing a man loading garbage bags into a Honda CR-V. They hadn't recognized him, but noted he made several trips in and out of Dorothy's apartment. Police took down a description of the vehicle and put out a bolo. They also looked in the national databases to try and get any information they could about Miss Siner. They found her, and she was alive, but claimed to not reside in Galveston, Texas, and she certainly wasn't mute. When asked if she knew Robert Durst, she replied that she did. They had attended high school together back in the 50s. She was baffled. She hadn't spoken to Durst in decades and had no idea why there was an apartment rented using her name and social security number. 7 days later, a vehicle matching the description is found, and they pull over the driver and search the car. Inside, they saw a bow saw and visible blood in the trunk of the vehicle. They arrested the 58-year-old driver on October 9, 2001, a man named Robert Durst, and charged him with the murder of Morris Black. After paying a $300,000 bail, Durst left Texas and went on the run. After failing to appear at his court date, he was declared a fugitive. While on the run, Durst had the nerve to rent a car in Mobile, Alabama, under the name Morris Black. And then, in another strange twist, he was found and arrested at a Wegmans grocery store in Bath, Pennsylvania. He was accused of shoplifting a $6 chicken sandwich, bandages, and a newspaper. And even though he had $38,000 in cash with him at the time, along with 2 loaded handguns, also in his car was a Medicaid card and a driver's license belonging to Morris Black. Durst had also shaved all of his hair as well as his eyebrows, and at first he hadn't been recognized as the millionaire fugitive. It was only when the arresting officer ran his social security number that he discovered the warrant for his arrest. In January of 2002, he returned to Texas to stand trial for the murder of Morris Black. According to Durst's testimony, he came home on September 28, 2001, to find Morris in his apartment, angry. While Morris had a key to the apartment, Durst hadn't been expecting him. Durst said that he immediately suspected Morris of taking the gun that he'd stored in the oven. When Durst asked him where it was, Morris reportedly stood and pointed it at Durst. Durst claimed that he grabbed the gun and the 2 men fell to the... Durst said he didn't go to the police because he didn't think they'd believe him, given his past, reputation, and suspicious situation. Though according to a private investigator, Bobby Baca, she had been able to piece a connection going way back of Durst and Morris Black. Morris had a brother, Harry Black, and the 2 of them owned a construction business in New York back in the 80s. According to family members, it had been funded by the Durst organization, specifically Robert Durst. Harry had passed in 2003, but his wife had said that when he learned that Morris had been murdered, he was concerned that he would be next. When asked why, he said that he knew dark secrets. Black's wife told Baca that she believed that the brothers knew something about Kathleen Durst's disappearance. Prosecutors believe that Durst murdered Morris when he found out his true identity, and he killed him out of fear that he'd been found and charged with Kathleen's murder. Robert had specifically chosen Galveston, and he arrived concealing his identity as an old woman, only to show up at a low-income housing building next door to a man that he used to fund to do work for him. And if we believe that Durst murdered Susan to tie up a loose end regarding Kathleen's disappearance, perhaps Black had also been connected in some way. In his trial, Durst had hired the best criminal defense attorneys that money could buy. The trial lasted over 2 months, and despite a mountain of evidence, on November 11, 2003, Durst was found not guilty of Morris's death and was acquitted.
Glenda Brentz was an alternate juror in the Robert Durst murder trial. She's convinced the New York real estate heir's testimony, full of holes and inconsistencies, should have landed him with a guilty verdict. Instead, he'll walk away.
In my opinion, it was his story against the evidence, and I didn't believe his story.
But the 8-man, 4-woman jury disagreed.
It wasn't proven, so you have reasonable doubt.
The jurors say there wasn't enough evidence to rule out Durst's claim that the gun went off accidentally as he struggled with neighbor Morris Black in September of 2001. Prosecutors are in disbelief.
Mr. Durst is not going to be invited to my house for any reason at all.
Though acknowledging Durst's history as an unusual character, a loner prone to drug and alcohol binges, the jury stands by its decision to acquit.
I wouldn't be asking him to escort my daughter to her senior prom this year, but, you know, I can't say where Durst will live. Durst is not the only crazy person in Galveston.
It was a shocking end to a brutal trial. He was initially put on a $3 billion bail due to his previous bail jumping and tampering with evidence, but the amount was eventually lowered to $450,000 after a court found the amount unconstitutional. In October of 2004, just as he was about to be paroled, Pennsylvania authorities charged Durst with weapon possession stemming from his time on the lam. In July of 2005, he was released from federal prison and sent to Texas to serve parole. Couldn't seem to stay in one place. In December of 2005, he was arrested for a parole violation for making unauthorized trips to Galveston. He got caught after visiting a Texas mall, where he happened to run into the judge who was presiding over his murder trial. In February of 2006, Durst was released from prison, and his parole supervision ended 9 months later. Once again, he was a free man.
You testified at Durst's parole hearing, and it wasn't long after that that you found a dismembered cat on your doorstep. Why do you think Durst was involved with that?
When I came home and I drove up, I saw something right at the foot of my sidewalk, and at first I thought it was a dead rat. And as I got out of my car and focused on it, I realized it was a severed cat head with the front 2 legs attached. And I thought, oh my God, what in the world is that? Is that really what I think it is? And as I'm trying to process this, it dawns on me that this is a severed head. And this was done perfectly. It was clean. This was a hot June 29th day in Texas, which is very, very hot. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a drop of blood. There wasn't a body fluid. There wasn't a hair out of place. And it was laid there perfectly with the front 2 paws crossed. Mm-hmm. It was placed there very, 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 very carefully. So I'm looking at something thinking, oh my God, what is this? And it hit me, oh my God, this is a severed head. And I knew that he'd had a history of destroying animals and cutting up animals and doing horrible things to them. Mm. And I thought back to that moment when he was in my chambers and he was looking at all of my pictures when he was angry about me not allowing a cartoon in for their defense. And I ran into my house thinking, oh God, please let my dogs be okay. And they were fine. But it was the fact that it hit me that it was a severed head.
And when you, the part of the reason you linked this to him was, of course, you had testified at that parole hearing, you had been the judge in the case. But you mentioned other things he'd done to animals. His family has raised questions about this, and I'll note it's his family. We don't know if, none of this has been fully substantiated, but according to his brother, he had dogs. They were all Alaskan Malamutes, all named Igor. All of them mysteriously disappeared, one after the other, all of these dogs. So do you believe this story? What do you think happened to those dogs?
Well, actually, I didn't hear them from the Durst family. I'd heard it from several people, including Jim McCormick, Kathy's brother. And during the trial, there was a photograph introduced that was found on Bob when he was arrested in Pennsylvania that had him and Kathy in it and had the dog in it. And the dog's name was Igor. Well, then later when he was talking in the tapes that I listened to, he was talking about another dog that he'd had more recently named Igor. Well, I thought that dog can't be 20 years old. And so later I was told by Jim that he had a succession of dogs and every one of them was named Igor and every one of them died an unnatural, mysterious death.
And there was a moment on those tapes where you think he used the word Igor to refer to a human being or what he wanted to do to a human being?
Yes, I do. There was a time when he was talking to his wife, Deborah, about going to his brother's house when he was on the run. Mm-hmm. And he stood in the driveway, and there was some sort of a social event going on, and he told his wife that he thought about doing an Igor to his brother. And his wife stopped and said, stop, stop, stop. This is a recorded line, Bob. And it was clear what he meant, and it was clear that she understood what he meant enough to stop him from talking anymore on a recorded line.
Well, that is going to be where we are going to wrap part 2. In our next video, we're going to wrap up with what came after his arrest, his second trial, and additional victims that may be connected to Durst. As always, please give this video a thumbs up if you like the content and subscribe for more if you haven't already. If you've done all that and want to support me and the channel, we have channel membership as well as Patreon to get early access, members-only content, live streams, and more. We also have merch and other goodies in the description box below, as well as links to all my socials. But until then, I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.